It happened in 1989. I was working in geology, in the taiga. There were 5 of us in the team. A geophysicist, that is, me, Charlotte, the geologist, the team leader, and 2 assistants. We set up our camp on the bank of a mountain stream, which was located in the taiga. We put up 2 tents and equipped a place for a fire. Nearby, there was a spring from which we took water for drinking and cooking. The days were sunny. We left as soon as the dawn began and returned at dusk. A week later, we heard on the radio that we should come urgently for food. It started to rain everywhere. The level of the river began to rise. The head of the detachment and 2 assistants left early the next day for the base. A girl geologist and I stayed in the camp. The chief promised to return the next day in the morning. By evening, a strong wind had suddenly come. The trees groaned under its pressure and made creaking, gnashing, and cracking sounds. All living things, birds and animals lay still, as if in a premonition of trouble. This went on for about 2 hours. At that time, the sky was covered with heavy lead clouds. It seemed that a little more, and they would descend to the ground, crushing it with their weight. The taiga was covered with a black blanket. The wind stopped abruptly, as if someone up there had turned off a huge fan. A sudden burst of lightning lit up the whole place, and then it rained. We were sitting in the tent. Charlotte was reading a book, and I was processing work materials. Suddenly, we heard an eerie rumble. When we ran out of the tent, we saw that the creek had turned into a thunderous, raging river. The campfire had gone underwater, and the tent with food had already begun to flood. We rushed to save them. Sugar, salt, fat, and stew were quickly carried to our tent. As our tent was on a hill, and there was a hope that the water would not flood it. It was pouring from above, like from a bucket, and our feet were knee-deep in water. By the time everything was dragged over, we were cold and very tired. Charlotte immediately got into her sleeping bag and was asleep in 5 minutes, and I had a job to finish. I changed into dry clothes and started working. Outside the tent, the weather was raging and the river was humming. I began to warm up. Suddenly, I was alerted by a sound that joined the existing sounds. At first, I heard a baby crying. But where could a small child come from in the taiga, where it was 70 kilometers away from us? Listening, I thought that I had imagined it. 10 minutes passed, and I heard crying again, but more clearly. It lasted for about 10 to 15 seconds, and then there was laughter, which made my hair stand on end. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I woke Charlotte up. She was sleepy and almost didn't hear anything. But when the loud laughter came again, Charlotte turned pale and asked, "What is it?" The thunderstorm was gradually receding. The peals of thunder were heard less frequently, and the sound was muffled. The rain also began to subside. Laughter was approaching our camp. I persuaded Charlotte to come out of the tent and see which side of the tent the laughter was coming from. Maybe we could figure out who or what was making it. We went out and started listening. The rain had finally stopped, with only heavy drops dripping from the trees. It should be dawn soon. The laughter stopped and then started again. It sounded ominous. Then the laughter was joined by a sound like the tinkling of bells and the screeching of a saw at the same time. Out of fear, Charlotte scrambled back into the tent and started yelling at me to get in and close the tent too, as if the tent would protect us, and I couldn't move from my seat out of fear. I was in a stupor, and I just kept looking in the direction the sounds were coming from. It began to turn gray. In that direction, I saw vague dark shadows, about 2 meters high. There were several of them. They were between the trees. They looked like blurred human figures in some kind of rag. I began at first to whisper and then, in full voice, to recite a prayer. They froze in place, swaying from side to side. Suddenly, the rays of the sun cut through space. It was dawn. The shadows shuddered and melted away. On woozy legs, I reached a stump that was a meter away from our tent and sat on it. "Did you see them?" Charlotte asked me. I flinched in surprise. Charlotte looked in the direction where the ghosts had recently been. I looked back at her and asked, "Where did you see them from since you went into the tent?" To which she replied, "When you didn't want to go in, I went out again and looked in the same direction you did and saw those tall shadows. It was eerie." When the men returned, we told them about the night. The squad leader didn't believe us at first, saying that fear is great and that we had imagined the whole thing. There was laughter. And then one assistant, who used to be a hunter and a local, believed us. He looked at everyone and said, "They didn't dream it. They saw it all for real." And they are not the first to tell us about it. Here, 30 kilometers from here, there is a ruined place, a swamp, and next to the cemetery. A lot of people died there. If you look from the outside, it's just a meadow with pools of water. The swamp is inconspicuous, and that's why people die there. But the shadows didn't usually get this far from the swamp. Something made them move in our direction. Maybe they wanted us dead. The deputy told us all, "My advice to you is, let's move the camp up the creek. There's a good spot up there. It's about 2 kilometers from here." No one laughed this time. The team leader gave the go-ahead, and the same day we moved to the new place. Nothing supernatural happened during the whole time we were working. It was a very creepy night in the forest. I hope you enjoyed my story. Subscribe to my Underground Scream channel and like this video. That way, you will motivate me to write more scary stories. And I won't say goodbye to you. See you soon.